You're listening to NacChat with Amy Mahaffey, straight from the city of Nacogdoches, where we chat all things Nac. We make any topic fun, and I'll take you behind the scenes of the oldest town in Texas.
All right, everybody, we are here once again, episode 8 of NacChat with Mr. Jim Jeffers. Welcome back.
Thank you, Amy. I'm glad to be back.
Yay! See, I told you had to get excited for this, so I'm glad
Yes, ma'am.
You found your excitement. So we decided this afternoon to talk about something that we don't normally get to discuss, and so I'm excited to kind of hear what you have to say about the legislative process. We're in the middle of a legislative session, and we, of course, pay attention to that for several reasons.
Yes, we do, because a lot of the legislation that can be adopted in Austin has an effect on municipalities, and typically it's not good news. And so the Texas Municipal League, with its 1,000+ cities, monitor that legislative process very carefully, and we engage by providing testimony, writing letters, making phone calls.
And I think it's important to kind of start at the basis of this and explain why that's important. And you kind of did a great job of that, of saying, we need to be engaged in that process because it does affect us, and it affects us quicker than any legislation might at the state level or at the federal level. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
So I think the reason, and kind of our motivations for wanting to share this with all of our listeners today would be to encourage people to get involved in that process. And so talk a little bit about what that looks like and how that can work.
Well, the legislative process is overwhelming. We've been told that this particular session they will have a record number of bills filed, setting records and exceeding it by thousands, like 4,000 or 5,000 more.
Wow.
And all that changed a few years ago when the legislature was allowed to introduce bills electronically. And so now they introduce bills with a push of a button, and boom, they're there. And they don't always receive the proper vetting. It may be an idea of a constituent, may be an idea of that legislator, but somebody has to read every one of those bills for the cities to make sure there's not something very overt or something covert hidden within that legislation.
So for folks that don't understand TML and how it works, can you kind of explain that process and why they are important to the city of Nacogdoches?
The Texas Municipal League is an association of cities. They provide training, they provide legal advice, and also they are our lobbying arm. It's important to note that when it comes to lobbying, there are no tax dollars that are being spent on lobbying by the Texas Municipal League. They use fees generated by their conventions, where vendors come and they will rent space to show their wares in order to fund those lobbying efforts. And it's not unusual for the legislature to say, Texas Municipal League, because you're so effective, we're not going to let you lobby anymore. And that's usually the linchpin, is say you can't use tax dollars. And so the league wised up to that years ago and said, we're not going to use tax dollars for that lobbying effort. But when we're out of session, the Texas Municipal League puts on conferences for its affiliates, which would be city managers, police chief, fire chiefs, Main Street managers, communication directors, and any other function that the city has. And also they provide training for city council members, newly elected officials. We call it baby city council school or baby mayor school. So you send a newly elected official to that school to where they can interact with other officials that are in the same predicament they are, being new. And also they receive training about how to be an effective elected official for a municipality.
So some people hear lobbying and it's like a dirty word, and that's not really the case for us, is it?
Lobbying is not a dirty word. It is a dialogue. Now, lobbying can become crooked, backdoorish, and can be bought, but the Texas Municipal League, we don't do it that way. We don't have money to buy votes, and we educate legislators, and we want them to understand what it is that they're voting on just simply before they vote. Because of the volume of bills that are filed, it is difficult for our state legislators with a limited staff to keep tabs on what's going on. And also, there are lobbyists on the other side of city issues that are trying to make their point, and you get a balance of information, and then it's up to the individual legislator to decide where they're leaning and how they're going to vote. But it's important to be a part of the process, and it's also important for citizens to be a part of that process.
So let's land the plane. What does that mean for Nacogdoches, and why is this, let's maybe talk about Senate Bill 2 coming up.
Yahoo!
Yay!
I was beginning to wonder. Senate Bill 2, and there will be a public hearing on the Senate side next week. It lowers the appraisal caps that municipalities can have from 8% to 4%. This is an increase in appraised value, and also it has an impact on revenue caps. Texas is fortunate, in my opinion, that its cities have something called home rule, and all it is local control. And the government closest to the people is the best to govern the people, simply because they're there, interacting with them on a daily basis, go to church with them, see them in the grocery store. And we feel like that the state needs to stay out of our business, and we can say it many different ways, and sometimes we're not too kind about it. But local control is what's made this state great. And the state in recent years has been ratcheting down on cities and counties and saying that, no, you can't do that. I'll give you an example. In Denton, 2 years ago, actually it was before that, the citizens of Denton voted to prohibit fracking within the city limits. That's a local issue, and it doesn't make any difference whether you're for or against fracking. They decided, and then the state legislature stepped in and said, nope, you can't do that. Oil and gas is our purview. That's none of your business. Get out of it. And the state legislature is always looking at putting their finger in the pie, whether it be texting and driving. There's been legislation introduced every year about that to circumvent what cities have already done, and we just don't think that's any of their business. Now, back to the issue of Senate Bill 2, what that does, it affects the city council's ability to properly fund police, fire, and to properly fund all the operations of the general fund. And it is up to our citizens to decide what it is they want and what it is that they don't want, without having some type of artificial cap placed on the city council by the state legislature. By the way, those caps, if the citizens want that to be imposed, they have the power to impose that via the city charter. It takes an election, and so we can do this now if we want to, but it's bad business. It's always ironic that the state legislature is putting these restrictions on cities, but those same restrictions don't apply to the state legislature, and they tend to blow those issues aside and ignore them because, well, we're the legislature, your local government, we'll tell you what to do, but we won't necessarily do what we preach. And it can get to be pretty frustrating. With that said, we do have two great legislators, and Travis Clardy, our representative, as well as Senator Nichols. Unfortunately, with Senator Nichols on Senate Bill 2, we're probably on opposite side of the fence. That's not going to stop us from respecting him or stop us from supporting him, but we're going to be vocal about our position on Senate Bill 2 and why it's bad for local government.
So if somebody at home listening feels very passionate about this issue, which we hope that they do because it will ultimately affect their day-to-day lives, and you mentioned police and fire as a really tangible example for folks at home, what can they do to get involved? How do they go about that process? I think, like you said, it can be a daunting process for some people.
Well, the first thing I would encourage them to do is to read a copy of the bill. So you can go on to the legislative website. I don't have the name, but you can type Texas Legislature in for a search and it will take you there. And so be informed, read a copy of the bill. And then you could go to the hearing, but if you go to the hearing, you might as well take a sleeping bag because there's going to be lots of people there, both for and against it. And testimony, I think, is going to be limited to 2 minutes each. And they're going to go through an awful lot of people. The hearing could last, well, I've been at hearings before that literally lasted 14 hours.
Right.
And you're afraid to leave because you're going to miss your opportunity to be called up. And I wouldn't encourage people to step out there and do that unless they're really want to be a zealot about it. But what they can do is that they can email or they can call their state reps and let them know how they feel about an issue. And I think that that's important. Whether you're for or against it, they would like to hear from you, and that's what they're there for, is to be responsive to the will of the people.
Perfect. Have you done that?
Yes, ma'am.
That's good.
We have called Senator Nichols' office. The mayor did that and expressed his concerns. Senator Nichols received a letter from me, which it's kind of unique because I got 40 years in the business, and I could offer a perspective that others could not. If you want meaningful tax relief in Texas, then the state legislature needs to wipe out the school local property tax, and then they need to fund it themselves. The education is the responsibility of the state legislature, not necessarily local districts. You still want to have that local control, but the funding is supposed to come from the state, and the state has balanced their education budgets on the backs of the taxpayers. And the city tax rate and the county tax rate is significantly lower combined than the school tax rate. And so if you want meaningful reform, tax reform, do away with the school tax, fund it with state government funds, and then you have meaningful tax reform.
And that has to do with what you're saying because of Senate Bill 2. Explain the connection.
Senate Bill 2 is putting artificial caps on cities and counties, does nothing to schools, because that's important to the state. It's a little hypocritical. Mm-hmm. And so what we're saying is leave cities and counties alone, and if you're serious about tax reform, do something with the school taxes. Don't have to. We're not advocating that, but we're just simply saying city and county tax rates are low and we're responsive to the citizens that we serve.
Well, there you go.
Yay.
Yay. All right. Well, I think with that, we'll probably sign off unless you have something burning you'd like to add.
Burning? No. You know, the legislative process is a little messy, but it can be fulfilling if you will engage and follow bills that are of interest to you. No one can follow everything that's introduced unless you're some type of superwoman like you. Mm-hmm. But most of us don't have those talents, and so we will continue to toil in obscurity.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. And with that, we will sign off episode 8, one of our bonus episodes discussing Senate Bill 2. And have an awesome day. Thanks.
Thank you.